Hello and welcome to Left Coast Live. I am your host, Deter McBusiness, joined instead of Stat Pat Stateless Patriot tonight by Sean Table, who we will get to know in a few minutes. But thank you for joining us. I am America's favorite white Anglo Saxon Protestant gone West Coastal, and today we are talking to a capitalist, someone that did very well for himself, has learned a lot, has a lot of empathy for my views. And oh my God, just before we're about to do the intro, here we go. StatPad is joining us
What's
remotely.
up?
What's up, dude? How are you?
Oh, it could be better. My power's still not on.
All right,
I
so
actually
I'm
cut
gonna.
it off. I was hoping to have a one-on-one, so you just spoiled it. But I'll turn your
Oh,
power back on. I'll turn it back on. Let me make some calls.
you got it.
All right, so I'm gonna intro with Sean and bullshit with him a little bit, just so the audience gets to know him, and then we'll just the conversation will go organically. But Sean, from what I know about you, so we know each other through the stand-up comedy scene. You are originally from Northern California. You are a little bit older than me. You're a Gen Xer. I'm a elder millennial. Um, and you out of college had some random jobs working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, selling Yellow Page ads, but then got into the kind of niche business of corporate recruiting, and specifically within the tech sector, and that led you to a pretty healthy living within the context of the tech boom, late 90s, early 2000s. That kind of time frame was when you started feeling successful.
Yeah, and those weren't side jobs. Those were the foundation of my professional career.
Right.
3 months at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which was foundational. Some of that at the Oakland Airport, which is a hallmark of the establishment. And then selling Yellow Page ads. Really got to see a lot of Oakland, Hayward, and Fremont, which was lovely. And then I always enjoyed recruiting. In terms of like the social aspects. And then I reached out to a friend about recruiting. I was gonna actually my first like recruiting idea. There was a company called Account Temps, which is recruiting accountants, which I thought sounded fantastic. And I talked to a friend who was working as a tactical recruiter at an agency, and I called him. I'm like, I think I'm getting into recruiting. This was in 2004, and and he's like, you shouldn't do that. You should come work for this company called Tech Systems, which is a very large, very great recruiting agency on the tech side. With agency recruiting, meaning you're recruiting externally. So instead of working inside a company, you're working externally. And so this was recruiting more like the low level. I shouldn't say low level, but for more of the more junior level positions, and say like help desk, desktop technicians for a lot of banks. These were contractors. And then I started in recruiting in 2004, but I still had aspirations of being, which might seem obvious looking at me, as a professional musician. And so I was going through kind of work, not really focused on it, but I learned about recruiting while I was still taking voice lessons, and I did that till 2007, and then I quit, which my boss didn't try and talk me out of it. So I think I had her support on that. And then I did music for about 3 years. And then when I was turning 30, I was like playing a lot of music at like really nice houses and not making any money, and realized at 30 I should probably start looking at income. And so I honestly went online. This was 2009. So, or I'm sorry, it was 2009. And I saw a Craigslist ad for it's called a sourcer. A sourcer is a recruiter that simply finds and reaches out and engages a candidates, and then like once they're engaged, you give them off to a recruiter. But it was a sourcing opening for a search advertising company based in Mountain View, so which was Google.
Of
And so
course.
I got in with Google, spent about a year there, and then my dream was always to work for a startup. And so I worked at Google, then I went to Skype, worked at StumbleUpon, which was it's a smaller company, which was actually the CEO is Garrett Camp, who was the founder and chairman of the board of Uber, who was the CEO there. It was right when Uber was taking like it was just black cars in San Francisco, and so it was cool to get to work with him. And then I went. Kind of my dream was to work. Initially, it was for Airbnb. This was in 2011. I found out Ashton Kutcher had invested. This is when they had like 40 employees. I believed in Ashton's investment theses, so I figured it was a good company. I interviewed there. I did not get the job. I performed terribly. But then Square was the other company I always really liked. And so then in 2011, I went to work for Square. I was there for about 5 years. And then I worked at Snapchat for 2 years, or it was Snapchat, and then it was called Snap. And then took some time off. That's when I met the lovely David here in terms of getting into stand-up comedy. And then COVID hit, and I've been recruiting for kind of earlier stage startups ever since.
Right on. That's a hell of a bio.
And now you know everything about me. Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah. Thank you for joining us. And I think the value for our audience is someone that has worked with a lot of high-level tech entrepreneurs and high-level tech executives, as well as low-level people too. The working class of the tech space, if you will, when you're first starting out. And then I'm sure the clientele got more and more higher brow as time went on. So you are a walking, talking example of someone that represents the difference between Gen X and millennials economically. You got out of college and kind of meandered around for a while, but ultimately benefited from the economic boom of our time, which was the tech boom, starting in the late 90s, going all the way, you could argue up until the housing crisis, or even after that, even into the teens. I don't know. I mean, you would know better about me with the charts of value and so forth. But I always theorize that the Gen Xers are a little too competitive for their own good. And by that, I mean, it's just a work hard, play hard generation. And I think that's the other value that you bring in here is you're a Gen Xer that's from California, that's pretty socially aware, but yet you've had success and you think that, well, tell me if I'm wrong, but you think that, you don't think that the system is fair. Let's start there. Do you think the economic system of America is fair? And then follow up is, do you think the tech space is fair?
Well, I think first off, in terms of like Gen X in prosperity, when you think about it, I graduated college. I was supposed to graduate in 2001, but I graduated in 2002 because I like studying so much. But that was coming out of the bubble bursting. So like that was the equivalent of graduating in 2009. So in terms of like economic prosperity of the .com boom, folks that graduated in 2001, 2002 had somewhat of a more like equivalent to graduating in 2009. I don't know how
it wasn't as bad, but it was bad. I remember.
Yeah,
it wasn't as bad, but it was bad.
And those were the early career years. And when you think about it from a tech standpoint, in 2004, Zuckerberg was still in his Harvard dorm room. You look back at like in terms of like tech, in terms of recruiting in tech, Google started in 2000 and that was 1990. I think it was 1999. I think they IPO'd in 2002 or 2004, but there was a massive consolidation. There wasn't a lot of tech companies. It was still Oracle. It was still Sun.
Right.
IBM, Microsoft was there, but the tech boom in terms of like I'd say the proliferation of all of these now like unicorns, all that really transcended. And the boom that I was lucky enough to hit was the post 2009 to about 2015, and now we're seeing it with AI, which is this whole new boom happening over the last couple of years, to where like even though we've gone through a lot of the, when I say I still like Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials. I think, spiritually, I think I might be a millennial still, but I lose track on, where those things land. But, graduating, to really have recoup the gains from the internet boom, not a lot of people did, because it was still it was a bubble, it exploded, and then it compounded on itself. And then in the end, the companies that were able to succeed from there, I mean, Yahoo was an absolute behemoth. People forget, like Yahoo was the it company. Famously, they offered Facebook, I think, $1 billion to buy it at one point. Or they offered it might have been Google. But when you think about that, the timeline of kind of boom and bust, the dot-com bust in 2001. You have the financial crisis in 2018. And then from 2009 to, you could say, to maybe up into the pandemic, 2021 was just that was what I consider just a very fortuitous gold rush of job prosperity, a lot of new companies, a lot of those things. And so, and then
A lot of investment capital.
a lot of invest.
All the investment capital that survived the housing crisis basically wanted to be in tech.
Exactly. And then
yeah.
when I joined Google in 2009, it was because they overreacted and they ended up, through a reduction in force or RIF, they let go of a ton of their recruiting team. And so then from when I joined in November 2009 to, I think it was maybe March or April 2010, they had hired 150 recruiters just in Mountain View alone, just to make up for the difference.
Wow. That's a lot.
And so, but from about 2010 to maybe even 2021, there was that massive, after unlimited quantitative easing during the pandemic, and all the stocks just rocketed up through the next like 9 to 12 months. There was just, every company was hiring pretty much open-endedly, and you weren't really seeing any hiring limits. And so I kind of lost sight of your original question to kind of give you that.
No, it's all good. No, I mean, understanding the peaks and valleys of the tech economy, I think, is required reading for understanding the American economy. I mean, it's where the growth is, right? Like, it's where we don't live in a labor-based economy anymore. We live in an intellectual property-based economy. And that's one thing I think the left really struggles with, is that transition where it's not just all about manufacturing jobs and the workers owning the means of production. We have to figure out what that means within the tech space, because that's the most important space in our economy, because it's where the growth is, like I said.
Yeah.
So the original question, go ahead, Stat.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to kind of harp away on that, like, the biggest thing right now is everyone wants to be invested in like the next big breakthrough, the next biggest and greatest invention or economic breakthrough. So that's why there's a whole lot of investment in AI lately, even though it's a giant bubble and there's more and more coming out about like 95% of firms and whatnot aren't actually getting a return in investment at all. So eventually that's all going to come crashing down. But yeah, it really is just like speculative. The economy is like just based on speculation right now. It's just thriving off of how much the ultra rich is throwing at the next big shiny toy that may or may not give them a big return on investment and whatnot. And it's kind of been that way for a minute now.
Yeah, I mean, that's my biggest issue with the American capitalist economy, is that it's so much based on who owns what, right? There's that saying that 90% of the possession is 90% of the law. Well, yeah, I mean, even my old man, like, who was a pretty successful guy, his job was to basically take this wealthy family's fortune and invest it well, so that their fortune continued to grow. And then, long story short, like, the best investment they ever made was, they bought an NFL team. And one of the NFL owners is now an NFL owner who's worth $4 billion or more, simply because he was born into a wealthy family in Boston, and my dad thought it would be a good investment play for him to use his money, his inheritance, to buy an NFL team.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the frustrating thing for me, Sean, is in most cases, like in oil futures, right, in old school like capitalism, where our old skill technologies, there's no like value added. Whereas in the tech space, when there's good ideas, those do get fueled. Like, and this is why I wanted to have you on, because Silicon Valley has done so much for America. And yeah, you can debate whether or not the social consequences have been good, whatever. If it's been regulated properly, it doesn't matter. Silicon Valley has been the cutting edge of the American economy for over the last 25 years. And it's created a lot of jobs and a lot of money. And now I'm wondering, is there a conscience? Is this wave of wealth different than waves of wealth in previous periods of American history where the sociopathy of wealth ultimately wins? But now I think with information technology and with people being able to see like what's going on in Israel, Gaza, for example, do these successful tech bros and entrepreneurs have a conscience? Or are they all like Peter Thiel who think that we can be AI'd into more immortality?
Well, I mean, it's tough because I mean, I think so when you say tech bro, I guess what is the ethos of tech bro?
So I would describe tech bro as someone who's a multimillionaire because of either their direct work or financial compensation related to being in the tech space.
Got
But
it.
net worth, I would say, in order to be in the top 1% now, I think it's like 13 or 14 million net worth. So we'll just say they're a 1% or tech bro kind of thing.
Got it. Got it. And I mean, I will say, like, to amass that amount of wealth in tech, unless you get really lucky, um, in outside of engineers, but I will say, like, the engineers that I recruited, say at Square and Snap and other companies, these are some of the most brilliant and absolutely mind-boggling, intelligent people who, when I work with them, money rarely came up. It wasn't really about the money. It was about solving very difficult problems with the best people possible. And, I wouldn't, I mean, obviously there was an incentive of making money, but until, there was, the Google IPO happened. Past that, there was a little bit of a drought. And then it was around 2009, there was a lot of, I would say, kind of foundational companies that redefine categories. So you had, Twitter, I think, was started in 2007. You had Airbnb, Pinterest, Dropbox. Zynga was really big when it came up. And
LinkedIn.
then LinkedIn was early there too. Absolutely. LinkedIn was, I think they were founded in 2003 or four, actually. They've been around for days. But a lot of the venture capital went into these companies and they were in their Series A, Series B around that kind of 2009, 2010. And they were also capitalizing on, there was a really, big insurgence based on the efficacy of say, like the earlier tech boom of 2001. I think it definitely shined a light on STEM engineering, computer science, to where when these companies that started developing, I think like Airbnb is a great example. Two of the founders had an idea. There was a I think, convention. They're like, hey, we should rent out our room to someone cheap to like develop a community. And that's how Airbnb was started. And then you had Pinterest and they were defining categories. They kind of reinvented things and brought those online. And so through, I think, the increase in engineering students that were not only entrepreneurial, but wanted to kind of get in there and create themselves, you saw these companies go from, being very early to, I don't know what they're worth now, but, they're in the 10, 20, 40, 100 billion plus category. Right. And so and the idea of like an IPO, it was always interesting, but all of the engineers that I worked with, I can never think of them talking about the money. And these are the ones that probably made, especially on the early Square days, some of the early Snap people I worked with made a lot of money, probably 10 figures plus. I think 10 figures is the right one. 7, 9, 8. No, 8 figures plus, 10 figures.
8 figures, yeah, $10 million, yeah.
I minored in math. I've forgotten a lot about that. But like money, they never really came from a financial place. I think the financial reward was residual of the incredible problems that they solved, the work that they were doing. And then, then they are obviously became wealthy. But I think a good kind of indicative of what drives these folks, especially I'll speak from Square. A lot of the folks, when I joined, it was about 200 people. Since Square, like there's probably about 5 or 10 people that have gone on to start their own companies based on problem spaces that they had an interest in, that they identify in Square. Now, granted, you could say, well, they have a lot of money, they can do whatever they want, but it's more, a lot of these engineers that I was working with, if you would meet them on the street, you wouldn't know they were an engineer. They're brilliant. Their brilliance and genius it's not something that they, overtly spoke about, but when it came down to solving problems and, I knew about the interview processes and they were just absolutely rigorous. I think the tech bro culture, I think that stigma is kind of a byproduct of there's a term a friend told me about when Facebook, went public and there was a lot of newly minted millionaires. There was a term called new money douchebag, and it's for folks that come into money and then once they have it, they turn into kind of a douchebag. I
Right.
will say I'm guilty as charged. Now, granted, I'm not wealthy anymore, so now I'm probably just a douchebag. But I think that I think there's a really underrepresented category of engineers and technologists that they just don't get a lot of screen time. But from a
Right.
capitalist standpoint or money standpoint, they're in it to solve problems with the best people
Exactly.
possible and make a global impact. And unfortunately, the loudest of the folks, you kind of get that tech bro moniker because a lot of people did come into a lot of money, which seemed relatively easily, but they did spend maybe 2, 4, 6, 10 years of their life building something that was probably deemed impossible.
Yeah, and that's what I want people to think of as engineers is as professional problem solvers. They're the highest level problem solvers in our society, pretty much. I think. The engineers that sell out and become C-suite executives can go fuck themselves because they abandoned their post, as far as I'm concerned. But because they are professional problem solvers, I have hope that the people who have been successful out of the tech space are going to actually respond favorably to the left's message over the course of the next 2 to 3 election cycles, which is going to be like we need to reorganize and redefine the relationship between government and citizen. And you alluded to a problem that I'm just going to see if StatPat's here. You alluded to a problem that I've talked about on here before, which is the corporate narrative since 1980 has been consolidation. There are too few players in these huge spaces, right? Like when we were kids, there were like 10 different gas and oil and gas companies, and now there's only like 3 or 4 or something. And the same happened with banking and big ag and a lot of other spaces. So what I'm wondering is if you were to pitch a lot of these engineers the reality that America's wealth is really concentrated and that we need structural change, do you think they would be receptive to a kind of new relationship between the government and citizen that's more reminiscent of what we had going on back in the 1930s and 40s with FDR's New Deal?
I think it's really nascent. It seems like, when you put it that way, it seems fairly straightforward, but a lot of what you're talking about, it doesn't, I would be curious, like what are the specifics of that? Like when you talk about,
FDR's second Bill of Rights covers all the big ones. It's healthcare, housing, healthcare, housing, employment, and Social Security and farmers' rights. And I think there's another one too that I'm missing. But then there's also like humane immigration practices. There's all sorts of creative solutions that that we've talked about on here, StatPat and I, like a immigration distribution system and like public works projects where we're taking places like Allentown, Pennsylvania, that have basic infrastructure there, but they're not being modernized. That's what the Chinese have been doing for the last 20 years, is legitimately building cities. And to produce this kind of society, you would need new sources of economic growth in that kind of form. It can't just be all about America's top 10 cities getting cooler and cooler.
We're gonna leave.
So healthcare, housing, basically employment, right to work. Oh, and education was the other one I was missing.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
think
a lot of what Bernie talks about, basically.
Bernie, yeah, I just, that didn't occupy a lot of our conversations. Granted, it was the workplace, and so obviously, politics wasn't something that we often brought into the workplace. But I got into some discussions. I think the question is like, will the folks I worked with, would they care about those things? Absolutely. I think they absolutely would. I think one thing is when you talk about those things, just like it's such a large systematic problem. And I think there's also a lot of apathy to where when we talk about it, it's not like going from point A to point B. And so it abstractly, if you ask anyone, at least from people that I know or knew tangentially, would you want to approve X, Y, and Z? Their answer is going to be, universally yes. And then if I said, great, what are you going to do about it? They'd probably be like, I'm not sure. And this is just even myself speaking. It's like, how do we as individuals outside of monetary donations or using monetary capacities to garner political influence or, going down the political route? I think there's a lot of ideas, but when it comes down to how do I influence those? How do I implement those into, a government system or a societal system, which is very complex, working against a lot of, what I consider corruption on every side of the house. I think those are some kind of philosophical ideas. It's like, if you're a good person, of course you're going to want those things.
Right. But don't you think like it's almost, don't you think the American like ego, the American ethos has always been like, it's not a question of whether or not we should. Once we decide we need to do something, it's just a question of how are we going to make it work. Right. Like we built the Tennessee Valley Authority. We, under the New Deal, we went to war. We went from having the 11th largest Navy to having the largest Navy in the entire world in a matter of 15 years or something, or less than that. So the American attitude towards challenges such as these should be, how do we make it happen, not whether or not we can. Because there is enough wealth to go around. And Staphat, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. I think that you're speaking, Sean, to the current attitude that most people have towards government, which is that our political system is broken. And, good luck trying to get the government to deliver all of those things that I listed, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You have no faith in the government to be able to deliver affordable housing. But what about healthcare? Because you've traveled, the universal healthcare systems work in other countries. Is that an issue that you would be like a good starter with?
I think so. And again, I think I'm a good guess because I'm opinionated yet somewhat uninformed. But when you look at Obamacare, I think that was the last or first or what have you time of trying to institute something that might be comparative to some sort of universal health care. And, and it's not universal health care, but it was healthcare progress where it was going to increase accessibility, and it didn't go very far. The marketplace side doesn't provide great insurance. And so I think the problem is, you look at companies, I think when you look at healthcare in the United States, it's become such a for-profit enterprise in terms of
consolidated too.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere too. I mean, when you look at, I was looking at United Health and their profit margins, and I wasn't even aware, but United Health, they insure, but then they also provide health services. It's a fully integrated provider. I was just curious how, they're making so much money. And you look at, it's just such a for-profit industry that's lobbied heavily within Washington, and so many people rely on it. And it comes down to not only, you look at prescription drug costs, you look at just covering health expenses. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that people are going bankrupt because of medical bills.
Yes.
When you look at the incentives of healthcare companies, that they're publicly traded, they need to grow, they need to increase profits. They have a modeling team that probably before anything happens models out how many claims they can approve and how many they can deny.
Exactly.
Before anything happens. And so when they're going through what they're going to approve and deny, they do that, and they probably have another team that's assessing the liability of the denials. And they're probably figuring out, okay, what can we do? What can't we do? And so, but it's a business. And I think we've created such a business. I think this applies to other things within the United States. I think the prison system, being privatized, and that's obviously a for-profit industry, and we pay the most out of any country. We pay the most out of any country for healthcare.
Yes.
And we deliver one of the lowest quality of cares. Like that doesn't make any sense possible. It's such a big business that I don't know the ins and outs of Obamacare, but it's just built so big. The lobby is so hard. There's so many jobs, this and that. And I thought it was interesting as things were going sideways over the last few months where most industries weren't doing well. The only industry that was actually profiting was actually healthcare. This was about a few months ago when they were talking about that. But yeah, when it comes to healthcare, I just don't know based on, you talk about that stigma too big to fail. I believe healthcare in America is just too big to change. And I don't know what the right or wrong answer is going to be there or how you do that. But it's such a behemoth of an industry that is creating so much wealth for the ones that are on the right side of it. When we look at the inequity of care, when we look at claim denials, when you look at just the overall health of the United States, and that could also stem from other factors, from diets, accessibility to good food, what have you. But as you can see from my standpoint, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we're the only, if not one of very few industrialized or modern nations that don't have universal health care. But then you do have people up in Canada that say we have it, but it's not great. And so
but people aren't going bankrupt. People aren't going bankrupt in other nations. That's the easiest way to win. That's the easiest way to win that argument, is to just say medical bankruptcy doesn't happen in other nations, and other people in other nations aren't dying as a result of this. But yeah, go ahead, Pat.
It's frustrating too, because I don't necessarily disagree. Like, the power that these insurance companies have is just so massive, but I still believe, as feckless as it is and how clearly not aligned with our interests they are, the U.S. government is still the single biggest entity that can actually challenge these companies in any meaningful capacity. But the problem is, when you have the heads of government and the leaders, as it were, subservient to them through, campaign contributions that are given to them, lobbyists that lobby for policy to be passed that favors them, it gives a lot of people pause, and it gives a lot of people a lot less faith in the government to actually do the right thing, essentially, and work for us. And it's because of that people are just like, nah, screw the government. I don't want them involved in anything. When it's just like, we can have people in there in government to not only change the way corporations are, the relationship that corporations have with the government, but also shape it in a way to where corporations have less power and labor has more power. And it's gonna be a long and tedious process, because it's just been done away with over so many years, to the point where a lot of people, especially the older you get, are just so jaded with politics in general. It's a frustrating thing, because it feels like an endless feedback loop. But I still believe that if the right people are in there, the government is the biggest vehicle for change, for positive change especially.
The thing is, I think for me, with government, is it doesn't affect them directly. The problems we're talking about, it does not affect them directly. It might, when you think about their constituency, you think about these things, but with the big beautiful bill, when they talked about taking folks off of Medicare.
I think this is changing. I know this is the right point. This is playing to Americans' narcissistic nature, and you're right. If it doesn't directly affect you, then it doesn't really motivate you to change your vote necessarily. But I think that's changing. I think that we're actually in the middle of a cultural flux where people are becoming empathetic towards those that they see on social media, whether it be on TikTok or Instagram. I think Israel-Gaza has become a lightning rod for this kind of international empathy towards genocide and towards mass killings and just mass injustice.
Yeah.
So,
but it's less. I want to be clear about one thing. I don't think it's. I think it's the government, the people that are in charge right now, aren't directly impacted by the very suboptimal healthcare.
Right.
And I think when it's convenient for their platform, when it's convenient for the reelection, when it's convenient to appease their constituency, or get this and that, they're going to get on a podium. They're going to talk about it. They're going to say all the right things.
They don't even do that. But they don't. But Kamala didn't even talk about universal health care because she wasn't promising it.
Well, she would probably get. I mean, that she was probably already talked about that. If she brought that up, it's a notion that she would probably lose votes, and that's the problem with elections. Is if she would
Medicare. So, do you know what Medicare for All polls at? Do you know what the approval poll is for Medicare for All?
Across Republican and Democrat?
Yeah, the whole country.
What does it pull at?
70%.
Yeah.
70% of people want Medicare for all.
And so why don't you think she campaigned on that?
Because of what you were talking about earlier with the for-profit healthcare industry having more power than it ever has, and that power continuing to grow, and universal healthcare would hurt the bottom lines of the status quo. At the end of the day, if you want to understand American politics, just check out the status quo and find out how we got there. Just work backwards from that. And that's what we're up against with the healthcare industry, is this enormous status quo that's been established for 45 years or more, that healthcare is supposed to be for profit.
Like, people think that Kamala Harris, or maybe like her and her, I guess, strategist thought that, like, oh, that's not going to play well. Socialized medicine. It's not going to play well with the voter base and whatnot. And all of this is just, it shows just how out of touch politicians are generally. You need to pull the Overton window back to the left. You need to show them, like, this actually polls really well. It's like we're actually seeing it right now. There are up and coming politicians, or soon to be politicians, people who are running for office. Graham, I think
Plantner.
Yeah. He's running for the Senate in Maine, and he very, very progressive. And one of his biggest standing ovations that he got during a rally, I think that he did with Bernie up there, and also he's campaigning for Senate to replace Susan Collins, which, thank fucking God. And one of the biggest standing ovations he's got is when he said we should be putting our tax money towards schools and hospitals, not dropping bombs on them in Gaza. Right. And it was a big standing ovation. It goes to show that the Democratic Party needs to catch up with where the voter base is, because a lot of them are still kind of like on the fence. They don't want to like piss off their donors like AIPAC, but like it really is a cut and dry moral issue. Like, if you're not going to stand with the base on opposing what is clearly a genocide, then what else can we even trust you with?
Right.
So it really is just a matter of just so many of them being out of touch and being slow to, I guess, catch up to where the voters are at.
But don't forget, their hands are tied because of the campaign donors. So you've got United Healthcare giving them money. I mean, they're just not going to come out, and they would rather lose. That's the thing that drives people nuts about the Democratic Party, is they would rather lose and have the Republicans win than actually offer up a socialist agenda. Because people talk about socialism, and it's like Social Security is socialism. It's the most popular program in the history of modern America, is Social Security, followed by Medicare and Medicaid. So Medicare for all is the stepping stone, I think. Once you get health care, then you can talk about housing, then you can talk about employment, then you can talk about education, and eventually get to those programs. But there's always the argument of how you're going to pay for it. How you going to pay for it. And maybe that's a good ask for you, Sean, because we were talking about, in our first conversation leading up to this interview, we were talking about how money doesn't really get taxed unless it moves. That's normally the case. What is, if any, are there tax revenue sources that you see that could be able to facilitate paying for some of these programs that we talk about?
I mean, I have no idea. In terms of tax revenue, I think you talk about the money moving. I think one thing that doesn't get talked often enough about is so many folks, at least in the tech side, are paid in stock-based compensation.
Right.
And they're in stock-based compensation, there's stock options where you get an option to buy a stock, and then there's RSUs, which is a restricted stock unit. And so in a stock option, when it's issued to you, you only pay taxes when you sell it. When you sell it, and that's when you pay the taxes there. With an RSU, if it's a publicly traded company, you get the RSU, it's taxed when you get it. But what happens is because a lot of folks have earned a lot of money, whether it be through options or RSUs, they have brokerages accounts that have a big, a high proportion of their net worth in that account. And what folks are allowed to do is they can borrow through that through what's called margin. So say you had, and when I say this is definitely not me, but let's just say you had 10 million in your brokerage account. You can you can take $1 million out on margin. You can actually withdraw that money, $1 million, and you're not taxed on it. And you can invest that elsewhere. You can invest it into another property. You can invest it other places. You're only going to be taxed on it is if the underlying security of which that margin is being based on is if you actually sell that security. And so a lot of folks, when they have these large, established bases of wealth within these brokerages, they're able to borrow from that, and they don't pay taxes on that when they borrow from it. Now, granted,
Right.
There was some legislation talks about taxing unrealized capital gains, which would be an absolute disaster. You definitely don't want to do that. There was talks about taxing something if you would, borrow from something like I'm talking about. But in terms of tax revenue, I don't know nearly enough about it. There's definitely certain aspects of when you think about, I come back to we've never seen this level of wealth before in terms of the amount of money that Jeff Bezos has. And there was recently, I believe he was quoted as, don't evaluate me on how, like, my charitable donations, evaluate me on how much wealth I've created through job creation, which personally I think there is some there is some truth to that. But at the same
time, he won't let them unionize. He won't let them unionize, though.
I'm not speaking for him.
Sure.
This is a Bezos thing. I think what I'm talking about is, I think he's worth what, 160 billion, 200 billion.
It's like, I think it's
200 billion. That's such a ridiculous sum of money.
Yeah, 240 billion.
240 billion. And now, granted, that's a small fraction of these folks. And we're not going to fund Medicare for all through Bezos. But in terms of these tax structures, I actually wouldn't know that. But I do think that there is a certain level of wealth that people achieve that if we did work out some way to where there was a substantial tax from that, especially if they're making that money in the U.S., because I don't think that's going to some people say, well, that will disincentivize innovation, will disincentivize people working for that.
Right.
I don't think if you tax somebody at 240 billion and have them contribute that to some government programs, I do think one of the concerns is, and this is more of an assumption than anything, is they don't trust the government to allocate their tax money accordingly, which I do think there's some truth to that. But, I don't have the answer in terms of, the tax code, changes that would then.
So I can't get into I can't get into details, but what if there was a way? Are you familiar with like family trusts and how wealthy people use estates to protect their wealth?
I'm familiar with trusts, but not to in a detail.
So, crash course for the people watching that are curious. A way for wealthy people to protect their wealth and help avoid getting taxed is to create individual trusts for not just themselves, but for their children as well. And you can pump money into those things and avoid taxes as a result. If there was a way for like Jeff Bezos, who's got like, I think 3 or 4 kids or something like that, if there was a way for Jeff Bezos to avoid paying taxes on like $1 billion, right? Let's say you could say, hey, Jeff, you would normally pay 50% on that $1 billion capital gains or whatever. Let's say his tax liability is like $1 billion, right? But what about if you contributed, a chunk of it to a debt relief fund that would get people out of debt? Because I don't know if you know this, but over half the country is in debt. Most of it's consumer credit card debt. A lot of it's academic and educational debt, and a lot of it's medical debt. So I don't know if you know this about lending, but lenders will cancel the debt at somewhere between as little as 15 cents on the dollar and go all the way up to like 40 cents on the dollar. But reliably, with big time money, to avoid getting nothing because the person could just file for bankruptcy, they're willing to accept 20 to 25% of the principal. So it's like, hey, Bezos, you got this $1 billion tax liability, how about you get, instead of you getting taxed at half, you take that other half, you take that $500 million that you were going to pay, and you put half of that towards debt relief, which at $250 million means that you could cancel out $1 billion in credit card debt with $250 million in cash. And then the other $250 million that he's saving, right, with this deal that he's making with the government, that money goes to his kids. Because the problem with people like Bezos, or not even people like Bezos, but people who are just like wealthy, is when they save money, they just invest it. They don't. The trickle down economics theory doesn't work, because the people, when they save the money, they just invest it and try to grow their wealth. They're not spending a ton of it and that would create jobs and actually might create that trickle down effect, but it doesn't happen that way. So that wiring it to the kids would get them to input that money into the economy more readily than a 75-year-old Bezos or whatever he is now. So what do you feel about that? If there was a program where they knew that their tax money, which would be millions and millions of dollars, because that's, a lot of them do want to cash out on capital gains, but they don't want to pay the capital gains rate, right? They don't want to cash out and they don't want to pay taxes on it. So what about a program like that, where you knew that the money was going to getting people out of debt and giving them a fair chance at actually getting their feet underneath them?
Well, I mean, I like that, but when it comes down to debt relief, I think the true solution is solving the systemic issues that create that debt. You talk about credit card companies that are charging 30% interest. You're talking about medical debt. I think there's things to solve there. In terms of and with what you're saying sounds fantastic. I couldn't talk about the nuance of it, but when we're talking about debt relief, when Biden tried to forgive the debt relief for college,
for student loans, for $10,000.
In the end, that still goes down to the taxpayer. And so by when you talk about debt relief, a lot of this debt is created on these institutions that we've already talked about, whether it be medical bills, whether it be, look at the credit card industry and the interest rates that they're charging, and these are insanely profitable companies. I think in tandem of finding ways to supplement that money to help them get out of debt, but by debt forgiveness, you're also rewarding the people that created that debt. The medical bills are still getting paid. The credit card bills are still getting paid. And so that's not really solving the problem. And the people that are creating the problem are still going to benefit from that. So if we create this cycle of creating ways to create debt forgiveness, the top 1%, that problem of why that debt's being accumulated.
Yes, that should be part of the solution. Yes, you should be solving the systemic problem that led to all those people being in debt. And by the way, the biggest reason is healthcare. I use my credit card to pay for my monthly health insurance premium, and I'm sure I'm not alone. So what happens is, and this would be the eligibility program. So it's what happens is people getting into credit card debt, for example, over time, right? They pay cash for rent and utilities and everything that they can, and they do the best to pay back their credit card debt. But let's say they have a $1,000 overrun every month. By the end of that year, they're $12,000 in debt, and now that debt is creating interest and so forth. And so over time, the debt just piles up. So it's two sides of the same issue, where you've got the results of the problem that I'm proposing that debt relief program for, and then you've got the system that you're talking about, which is, again, in order to talk about these micro problems, you can't help but eventually end up talking about the macro problems that are, many of these micro problems are deriving from, like a for-profit healthcare system, like an out-of-control consumer debt product market where everybody and their mother can get into debt like that. And, student loans, like the cost of tuition going way up over the last 30 or 40 years.
And meanwhile, these institutions have multi-billion-dollar endowments. That just
enormous. So that's why I think you find a creative way to funnel that money into, because that's the thing is, right, there's enough money to actually solve these problems. It's just a matter of how do you funnel it into the solutions.
And a lot of the rich people or wealthy people that would then, be doing these tax strategies, they run the companies that are creating these systemic issues that create a lot of the debt. And so it's approaching them personally or approaching them professionally, is the one thing. I'd be curious, because we talk about these billionaires like the Bezos, Zuckerberg, Musk. It's a small fraction of the ultra wealthy. Obviously, there's a select few, but I'd be curious. I know I think there was a bill looking to get passed. It might have been Bernie Sanders or somebody trying to make the max credit card rate down to, I think, 15%.
Yeah, that would be great.
Right.
And it hit the news cycles, and as all news cycles go, which are comical. If I've watched too much news cycles, it's 24 hours, 48 hours, and then you just don't talk about it. Case in point, like, have you heard anyone on the news talking about gun control today? Not a single one. That was a 2-day news cycle. Another interesting one, not to get too off topic, was the nuclear capacity of Iran. How that was about a 4-day news cycle. Obviously the altercation happened. We bombed them. Did we get all their nukes? Unsure.
Probably not.
We overstated that we did. And then a day later, not a peep. And it's just completely off the radar. And I just bring that up as these things come and go. It just becomes a talking point to get views. And then it's back to the status quo and nothing happens.
Yeah, and that's what we try and avoid doing on this show. Is that's why we don't do, like, we do a little bit of news, but mostly we try to do more in-depth strategy conversations about how the left can actually transform America. Because, like what I was just saying, there is plenty of wealth to go around. It's just not being distributed properly. And I understand people not trusting the government to do it right. And that's why, what to allude to StatPat's earlier comments, it's not about getting the current political leadership to evolve. It's about evolving the system by making the current political leadership extinct, because evolution requires extinction, and every mainstream political figure that you know of is a diehard baby boomer conservative capitalist, whether they realize it or not. They are into neoliberalism, whether they realize it or not. This whole abundance bullshit that you've been hearing about, probably, like, it's just another lipstick on a pig. Like, it's more of just the for-profit motive. Everybody can be rich, right? Like, everybody wants to be rich in America. Everybody can be rich. All this bullshit. And it's garbage, dude. And by the way, not everybody wants to be a billionaire. Not everybody needs a private jet. It's okay to just, like, fly commercial a couple times a year. It's really not. It's nice to fly private, but about $7,000 or $8,000 an hour, or more. But I wouldn't know anything about that. But Sean, so you like the idea of these creative solutions that I have. It's just a matter of selling them, right? Like, so that's the evolution of the left, is the next generation political figure. And I'm trying to leapfrog Gen Xers. So it's nothing against Gen Xers on an individual level. I just think that competition was so ingrained to people who were old enough to remember the Cold War before the Berlin Wall fell. So that was my earliest news memory, was the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that's kind of the beginning of the millennial generation, is if you remember that. We were so caught up in winning the Cold War that I think that trickled down from baby boomers into their Gen X kids, if they were, and that's why I think you see, according to the data, that millennials are more down with the social programs that I articulated earlier than any other generation. So I guess, are there any Gen X figures that you want to make us aware of, that have, like, kind of more of a progressive perspective? Or, because I'm trying to think of some, and I feel like every time I run into a Gen Xer in politics or in business, they're just, they're all about that money.
It's a Gen X. That's the what years? Help me out here.
79 was the cutoff year, so it's like 65 to 79.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say and this is someone I think we've talked about it before. Dieter is Jack Dorsey is one that I would say is I worked with him at Square. I shouldn't say I worked with him. I worked near him and dealt with him a few times, but I would say he's ultra. I don't know what his political stance is specifically, but I mean, he created Square because his co-founder Jim McKelvey was a glass blower, and he had a really expensive piece of glass, and someone wanted to buy it, but he didn't accept credit cards. And this was when Jack was leaving Twitter, and him and Jack talked, and Jim was like, "We have these computers in our pocket. Why can't I take a credit card payment on my phone?" And so they ideated Square, and the whole motive for Square was to empower small businesses and merchants and give them the tools that they need to succeed. And he lived and breathed that. We'd have Town Square every Friday. We'd talk about that. They'd showcase merchants that they were doing better, and it's a mission-driven company, and he wholeheartedly believed that. And he was really out there because he wanted to make significant change for small businesses that the credit card industry had largely ignored.
Right.
And then he went on, later he went on and started what's called the Start Small Foundation, where he took a large sum of his money, invested in that, investing in I believe it was a small business initiative. But in terms of someone who, in my interactions, he's someone he doesn't do it for the money. He does it for social change, social impact. Definitely wants to raise the average around him, and so I think that's obviously a very notorious name. Jack, is quite famous, but he definitely, in terms of the folks that I've worked with, he was, at the company, he didn't have an office. He would work out, in commons, as he would call, and if you wanted to, you can go up and talk to him, and if he did, he'd give you his undivided attention, and he would talk to you, he would listen to you, he would make you feel valued, whether you were a recruiter or the VP. But he's motivated by creating, really impactful social change. And so
Sure.
I would say he's somebody, and he's obviously well-funded. He's done well for himself, but I do believe that he is constantly thinking about how he can use his impact, his influence, his platform, his companies to really initiate progress to the underserved. And so he's somebody that I have the utmost admiration for. Loved, I spent a little bit of time with him, but I'd say he's someone that comes to mind with not only the wealth, the influence, the notoriety, and power that I do believe is really,
Nice.
a progressive that really cares.
We'll have to try to get him on the show. He's got quite a bit. He's got quite a bit of money.
Yeah,
I mean, if I
I've heard from him, or at least about him. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Stepet. No, you go, Stepet.
My connection is kind of dog shit right now.
Just talk. Oh no. Anyway, yeah, Dorsey seems like an interesting cat, and I bet if I pitched him that idea of saying, "Hey, for $100 million, I can go out and cancel out $400 million, dollars worth of credit card debt for people," imagine how much difference that would make. That's going to make a hell of a lot difference, that's going to make a more immediate impact than anything. Just getting that monkey off of people's back. Go ahead.
He started Blue Sky, didn't he? Didn't he start Blue Sky?
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I don't think so.
I'd love to pick his brain about, like, you basically started Twitter.
No, it was founded by former CEO, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey in 2019. Yep.
I think giving up Twitter was such a damn mistake, because it's God, it's so terrible now.
Well, it's the Twitter shareholders.
Yeah,
they had the bid, and they held a vote.
Yeah,
and, they had the bid. It was $44 billion, which was, I think it was north of what the market value was.
They paid premium. They took the deal because Elon overpaid for it. Elon overpaid for it by about $7 or $8 billion.
I think it was more along the lines of, like, he overpaid by like $30 or $35 billion.
After the
hindsight,
fact.
that's because of what happened to it. That's
but
because of what happened to it.
I think now it's because I believe, did it get acquired by XAI, or did
I think he, like, something like that. I think he like sold it to himself basically. I'm not exactly too certain about the details, but something like that. Yeah.
Because I think the valuation, I think it's cotton back up. Like it's looks like yeah, because it was 45 billion when the price went through. But I think
They bought
platform
it.
standpoint, it seems like it's definitely maintained. I didn't think the move from Twitter to X was going to fly. Now it still people call it Twitter, but still people call it X. But I think the market value has definitely has come up from that.
So this is from John McDropout. What up, John? I still worry that the next generation is even further alienated from the products of their labor, and despite their attitudes, may be at a disadvantage compared to millennial or Gen X in terms of organizations. Yeah, I think Gen Z is in a tough spot. I mean, things are only getting worse. Things have only gotten worse in America with respect to domestic policy since 1980. Nothing's really gotten better, except for crime. Like, we're really good at, managing crime because our police forces are all militarized. But that's cool. Statbat, did you have anything you wanted to ask Sean?
I mean, nothing in particular. I did want to apologize because like I was expecting my power to be back on earlier, so I'm doing all of this off of a browser on my phone. Otherwise, I'd be in a much more professional setting. But I appreciate you being part of the show. It means a whole hell of a lot.
Thanks. You look great, by the way. It's very Blair Witch style right now. It's very just stay safe in there. Just stay safe.
Of course, yeah. It's like it's fucking 85 degrees in this house, so I'm hanging in there.
That's the reality of California utilities. Sometimes is they go out on you. We had a blackout not too long ago, so and it's hotter than the hell where we are. Yeah, Megan says Blair Witch. Laugh out loud. Yes.
On
So
automation, on that one
automation.
Comment, well, I think that's because we talk about consolidation in general. Like, there's a massive amount of consolidation in the AI space right now. When you think about like the prominent AI players, especially when it relates to large language models, you OpenAI, you have Meta Superintelligence Lab, XAI, Google DeepMind. You have some newer other companies from former OpenAI folks that are coming out, but as you've maybe seen, the war for talent in the AI space, you're seeing these AI researchers, they're getting paid like athletes now. You're seeing Zuck, he's acquired some folks for a
$100
4-year
million
package for like $1 billion. Just the market for talent for these AI researchers. But what's happening is the market capitalizations of these prominent AI companies is so large, and this has been happening for a while, ever since. Because if you look at Facebook, Facebook is essentially a conglomerate of Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Oculus. And then when you look at Google, because there was all that when these companies started getting really big, what you saw is Google was one, is they had to make the transition to Alphabet. And they had the parent company, then they broke down a lot of their smaller entities into other arms of the company. That happened actually at Snap. Snapchat went to Snap and had a few different arms there. And I think that's part of the way to alleviate from that trust situation. But because the consolidation, these companies are worth so much money, when a promising, not necessarily a competitor, it could be a company like Instagram wasn't really competing yet with Facebook, but what could have been a feature. I mean, they bought Instagram for $1 billion.
Which was the best money he ever spent.
Which is amazing. They had, I don't know how many employees. The WhatsApp acquisition, they bought WhatsApp for $19 billion. Yeah, and I believe WhatsApp had 36 employees at the time.
I don't know why they spent so much on WhatsApp. That didn't make any sense to me.
If you look at it, I can tell you, it's actually really cool. If you Google it, if you look at a map and you go, Facebook acquisition of WhatsApp, it'll show you a map of the world of who uses Facebook and who uses WhatsApp. And the green areas is where Facebook was not, and the blue areas is where Facebook was. And so it was a massive way to increase their international expansion, because internationally WhatsApp was used a ton, where domestically Facebook had a much higher density of users. But by acquiring WhatsApp, they gained access to all that. And initially, WhatsApp's monetization strategy, they were going to charge $1 a year. That never happened. but the consolidation was there where Facebook, instead of allowing Instagram to remain independent or WhatsApp to be independent,
But don't you think that Facebook should not have been allowed to buy WhatsApp? That should not have happened. That should not have been. That's too much power.
I'm not. I honestly
Yeah.
think the domestic bureaucracy was probably so unaware of the international dominance of WhatsApp. Here domestically,
Mhm.
even now, WhatsApp is now gaining notoriety. I lived in Mexico for a while. That's WhatsApp is how you communicate it. A lot internationally, it's all WhatsApp. Domestically, WhatsApp was still pretty
Yeah.
nascent technology to where I wouldn't be surprised if the bureaucratic entity that might have had oversight into that even realized what they were buying. They probably had the
Exactly.
same reaction you did, David, is like, that's stupid. Why possibly would they buy this? But strategically, it made sense.
Well, the same thing too. I would say but it's just intuitive with Amazon buying Whole Foods. What the fuck?
Mhm.
Like, how is that allowed to happen? How is Amazon allowed to have even more power in the marketplace? Like, we
Yeah.
started off this conversation with talking about consolidation, and that's happened in telecom space thanks to Bill Clinton. And can you guys hear my dog barking, by the way?
Yes,
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Don't worry.
it's all
Okay,
good.
cool. But yeah. Anyway, everything's too big, and everything's too
Yeah.
powerful. And I'd like to see things broken up within the space, because I do feel like the for-profit motive has its place within technological innovation. There should be a for-profit motive to solve high-level technology problems. But I will say that, like, we've kind of conquered most of the evergreen territory the digital age was going to bring upon us, right? Like, we've
Hmm.
gone through the social media stuff that was going to happen eventually. Someone was going to invent Facebook. In fact, other people did with Instagram, all these Twitter, like, you can post photos on Twitter, like, it can serve the same purpose. It's all about, it's all kind of the same thing. But technology connecting us to make the global village happen. So the global village is here. And now I think instead of spending money on rockets to go around the Earth once for $250,000, we should be trying to solve global poverty. And this is an
Yeah.
argument that's been this is an argument that's been on the table since JFK said, "Let's go to the moon."
Yeah.
Oh,
Like
people are
right
like,
now,
"What a waste of money."
right now, there's just like, I mean, where else does technological innovation go until, I guess, quantum computing
Does
takes.
everything.
Yeah, exactly. Until then, it really is just more accumulation, and just gaining more and more power, just like sucking up as much wealth as possible into such few hands. And like the tech industry is one of the biggest players in that regard.
And look at entertainment. Look at Hollywood, the big players in Hollywood now. And Netflix
Hmm.
has become one of them, but there aren't that many studios. John McDropout has another one. This is what I mean. Are we going to break down the workshop using the master's tools? The mechanisms of communication that used to be common spaces are now manipulatable digital fields that are owned. Yeah, talking about the 1996 Telecommunications Act from Bill Clinton that allowed for so much consolidation. Basically, the rule of thumb is 1/5 and 1/3. If you have 1/3 of the market, you are the market. You drive everything. It's like AT&T and telecom, right? 1/3 of the market, you're controlling everything. If you have 1/5, then you're a major player, but the other players in the space can kind of squeeze you out if you start acting like a fool.
Hmm.
So I think instead of 1/3 being the maximum amount of ownership of a given industry, it should probably be more like 1/5. But that's just that's an arbitrary amount. It probably
Yeah.
depends on industries, but you can't argue, Sean, that in our lifetime, there has been just way too much consolidation within every major sector of the American economy.
Absolutely,
And
and yeah, and it's
Not
it's
likely.
and it's happening in the AI side right now. You think OpenAI, I believe their last valuation was 300 billion. Anthropic, their valuation was 67 billion. I think it's still climbing. And when you see their valuation acceleration, I made a chart of this, but it was fairly rudimentary. I mean, OpenAI was originally a not for profit. and labeled as an AI safety company. Anthropic was labeled as an AI safety company. Anthropic is my one of my favorites because I do believe that they are operating under the core tendency of AI safety and doing it in a safe way. Because I do think this isn't the right podcast, but AI I think could be very, very scary. But when you look at these valuation increases, when ChatGPT 3 launched, the valuation just went up and to the right. For Anthropic, when Claude launched, it just went rapidly up and to the right. But these companies are getting so big. When you think about that rationale, you talked about 1/3 or 1/5. I mean, for me, the first company that came to mind is NVIDIA. NVIDIA is, I think, a $4-5 trillion company, and I don't know when it comes down to market share, but if they're not in a dominant space right now of what they're doing. But I think in that space, we need someone domestically that's doing that. But I think consolidation is inevitable. I think it's just where you draw the line on where companies can't acquire other companies terms of, is it an additive feature? Because a lot of these AI companies, the monetization is still very new. You look at ChatGPT membership, you look at the way people are paying for these services. It's still very democratic. Right now, you could pay for Claude, you could pay for ChatGPT, you could pay for Grok. I pay for all three because it's not terribly expensive. I think they're very interesting, but I think a lot of that idea of not allowing that consolidation is you want a free market society, and when people don't have choice. So when you look at something like right now in LA, I have one choice for power, LAWP. There's no market there. But when it comes to like a lot of these technological companies, I'd still have the freedom of choice between the 3 different companies. And so that consolidation is feature building, whether it's, an AI company is going to acquire a certain company because of a certain feature, but they're so big. Any other company that's coming up, I do think will start becoming part of these larger companies because they're just
they'll get acquired. They'll get acquired.
And they'll give them an offer they can't refuse. And that's at Snap, Evan Spiegel, who I admire tremendously, he rejected, I think it was a multi-billion-dollar offer from Zuck that would have made him the youngest billionaire, and he said no. He wanted to create his own company. I don't think there's a lot of people on this planet
that would
could do that. No. I couldn't. No. I'll say I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I couldn't. But he said no, and he built his own standalone company and was very successful in doing so. But the level of capital that's being thrown around in the AI space, from not only from a venture capital standpoint, because the amount of investment going into these companies is very large, but the revenues they're attributing, the revenue growth that they're forecasting, these major players are going to just be so large. They'll be able to, if a company comes up spending $1, $2, $5, even $10 billion, it's not going to be a huge chunk on their balance sheet. And so I think
that's the biggest issue. That's the biggest issue that I have with corporate America, because I was a management consultant for a year at my first year out of college. I was thinking about going to business school. I know all about projections and forecasting, and how a lot of forecasting is making sure that operating income stays the same or at least grows a little bit every year. And people will go in and tweak the Excel spreadsheets to make sure that the forecasting has positive growth in operating income year over year. And that justifies a lot of these capital investments that you're talking about. And it's just anathema. They don't know what they're investing in. They just know that it's sexy and it's eventually going to be like the cutting edge.
Bingo.
They're investing in people.
Like I said earlier.
Right.
A lot of these companies, like a lot of these AI companies that are starting right now, are getting literally billion-dollar valuations, a month in or a few months in, based on the founding team. And when you think about it, I think Meta and Zuckerberg, he's establishing a market to where when you look at just the value of these, researchers, engineers that are getting, I didn't see the $1 billion package that was offered, but we're talking about in the hundreds of millions. If you assembled just 5 of those people into a single team that started a company, it's very easy to say, well, that company's worth $1 billion. Right. And so, I think that's going to be the really interesting thing, because you have a lot of folks that have worked at, I think OpenAI what they've been able to create, what they're doing is exceptional. Still, some of the most insanely bright people work there, but there is a faction of folks that worked there early that have moved on. Like Anthropic was started by former OpenAI folks. A number of other startups and companies have been started by former OpenAI folks. And these are brilliant, brilliant people that attract other brilliant researchers. And so I think I do think these market values are going to be substantiated. I think like OpenAI's growth trajectory and what they're projecting for revenue is definitely going to happen. The biggest thing is, just to come back to this conversation, is we still aren't going to see the impact of automation as it impacts the broader workforce. Because a lot of
Yeah.
people talk about, well, the printing press, well, it printed books and it didn't, or, it's going to create more jobs than it doesn't. AI, the CEO of AI, Dario, he went online saying that it's going to be a drastic cut to employment. One classic example is the gig economy and automation.
Right.
You look at Robotax, you look at, I think I haven't looked up the number, I should have it, but the amount of people that are employed by, say, Lyft and Uber, when robotaxis are there, where are those people going to go work?
Right.
When they're able to automate Instacart deliveries and DoorDash deliveries, which I think is a little bit more difficult because you're dealing with food handling, and there might be some regulatory aspects of that. But there's this gig economy that currently all of these companies have been investing in automation for the last 5-10 years,
Right.
simply so they can have automation to supplement the expense and the liability of the human workforce that's currently doing that. And so there's going to be a lot of displaced workers over the next 3 to 5+ years, but we still don't know the impact of automation on the more aggregate of the workforce. There's certain professions that have a high degree of their lists online that show you the professions that are more likely to be, I wouldn't say erased, because I think nothing's going to go completely away, but the impact of this AI and automation, because the velocity of AI is so fast, it's happening so quickly, it improves so fast that we won't know for about 3 to 5. I would say it's going to happen quick, the impact it's going to have on the broader labor force. And so for me, that's my biggest question, because I don't think AI is going to create more jobs than, as like the printing press did, or those examples.
No.
But that level of
a lot of the AI startups, like today, a lot of the smaller AI companies and whatnot, it really does seem to be about, like we said earlier, shiny new toy. It's about the hustle, seeing how much you can extract from investors. And because there's literally just so many AI startups. Like you drive through the 80 that goes through San Francisco. You drive right through town. I swear, like maybe 90% of the billboards that you see is some random AI startup trying to get their start, trying to bolster their profile. It's not the big name AI companies that are buying those billboards and whatnot. And not to mention a lot of small companies, a lot of small businesses are constantly, like a lot of new young businesses are constantly approached by these random no-name AI startups. Hey, you need to utilize us to make your business easier. And a lot of the time it's like just completely unnecessary, but it's getting to a point to where a lot of these young AI companies are not seeing a return on investment, because it really is just, like we said, a shiny toy for investors.
All right. Well, Sean, it was great having you. I think we'll call it a convo there, but we'd like to have you back and talk more about AI, because that's going to be only a sexier and sexier topic of conversation going forward. And I know a lot of members of our audience want to hear about it. Although I just got to jump up to 10 viewers on my channel, StatPat, so I'm setting records over here. If anybody in the chat has anything for Sean or me or StatPat, fire it up in the chat. We're just winding down here with my man Sean, who I know through stand-up comedy, and he and I have had similar walks in life on the West Coast, all over the West Coast, in the private sector as well as in the entertainment space. He's a little bit more musically inclined than I am. I'm a little bit more dramatically inclined.
And intelligent. I'd give you intelligence too.
Maybe educated.
If I didn't get too far off topic here, I might be compensated for my lack of political acumen by getting.
No, it's good. We want to have guests like you on who read and who actually do go down Google rabbit holes, because I don't think there's any excuse now for being ignorant, right? Like, is Israel committing genocide in Gaza? Yes. Like, that's just one way of, like, you'd have to be only consuming mainstream media outlets for you to not realize that that's what's going on, and only
Yeah.
conservative media. Like, the only way you don't know that Israel's committing genocide is if you're just watching all sorts of conservative media and then you're watching mainstream liberal media. And also, actually, I don't know,
Mhm.
Statpad, if you want to round it out here, but we should maybe talk. Did you hear about this payroll thing that's going on with Brian Tyler Cohen and David Pakman? They
Oh
basically, there was a
yeah,
fund. Yeah, there was a fund.
it's
So Sean, there's a division on the
juicy.
left between the neoliberal incrementalists and then the progressive structuralists like Stat Pat and I. We want to see big structural, historic level of change. And people like David Pakman and Brian Tyler Cohen, they are company men. They work
Yeah,
for the DNC establishment. And they were recently
essentially, yeah.
exposed in a Wired article coming out a couple days ago that said that they've been getting money, $8,000 a month, cash,
Hmm.
to
Up to,
basically promote the Democratic establishment. So there you go, money
yeah,
in politics again, man, rearing its ugly head. This time
of
to our
course.
benefit, Stat Pat. This helps our credibility a ton right now.
No, for real. And I need to do like a bigger deep dive on it. I have seen, I have like actually read the Wired article. But I guess like there's been more development since then, and I just need to update myself with it. But I mean, yeah, it's not like Brian Tyler Cohen or David Pakman really need that extra money per month. It's
Right.
just they're already super entrenched with the Democratic establishment. I mean, fucking David Pakman's met Joe Biden, for crying out loud, and he's always had very uh, bad takes when it comes to Israel. So
Yes,
it,
he's a Zionist.
but there's still like this exists, and people are getting paid to basically toe the line. And it's not so much like, yeah, I mean, sure, advocate for the Democrats, whatever. It's the fact that like it's preying on more vulnerable people who are like, oh, I can just live off this money. This could be my income, and then
Right.
getting dependent on that income from these people.
Right. Yep.
And
Yep.
I think when it's all said and not done, but when the
Mhm.
truth of what's happening between Israel and Gaza and the impact in Gaza, because you just don't see enough footage of actually the reality of what's happening there. Once
Mhm.
the broader American populace actually sees what's happening there, because it's so
Mhm.
shielded in mainstream media, and I probably have not seen I haven't seen the extent of it. Years from now, what happened from a history standpoint. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are going to be like, I had no idea. I had no
Yes.
idea what was happening. It's
Yes.
underreported, and
Yeah.
the more it's absolutely
But
it's
all you got to
terrible.
do is go. All you got to do is go on Instagram or TikTok, and you can see it with your own eyes. It's just the problem is
Yeah.
people don't want to see it. It's because it's hell
Well,
on earth. It's hell. It's
yeah.
literally hell on earth.
Yeah, you have to like separate yourself after seeing so much for a while, and not to mention there's just so many. I mean, countless journalists have been killed, and countless posts either get censored or taken down, or whole accounts too. So but the thing is, like, there's just so many videos, there's so many examples to where you're bound to find plenty anyway. But yeah,
It's just not hitting them. It's not hitting. I mean, bad word, the mainstream media, and it's not hitting sources
it's not breaking
Because of it,
through.
yeah.
Yeah,
unless you look
yeah.
for it and go for it. And I just think
Hmm.
there's a vast deficit of people that are actually aware, and sooner,
Yeah,
they will be
unfortunately.
aware. It will become, very much aware of what's
I think
happening
it's going
there.
to be a huge issue. I think it's going to be a huge issue
Of course.
in the next election and the election after that.
Yeah.
I think it could be. I think it could be the vehicle for cleansing the Democratic Party establishment. So your answer to your question was from earlier, though, Sean, is especially if you live in California. The answer to your question about how do you actually make a difference, how does power actually lead to positive change, is Democratic Party primary elections. You vote twice in even years. That's my big message to everybody. Is in America, if you take your citizenship seriously, you vote twice in even years. You don't vote just once in the general. You vote in the primary as well.
Hmm.
Here, John McDropout, one last time. I think the presence of all these milquetoast liberal voices diluted the gravity of the situation in many viewers' minds. In some
Yeah.
ways, these influencers ran cover just by covering everything but. Yes, I would absolutely
Yeah.
agree with that.
Mhm.
David Pacman and Brian Tyler Cohen actively avoided Israel Gaza, and that's how they dealt with it. Is they just avoided it.
Yeah.
And that's just one way to do it. There's only so many things you can talk about in such a little amount of time that you're going to give to people every day.
Yeah,
By the way,
and people
go
like
ahead.
them, people like them, they grow so big, they grow so massive to the point where like they stick to like the same formula. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's
Right.
how you develop audience capture. So like the audience expects, yeah, like the 60th Trump bad video of the week. Democrats good video. It's like, I mean, I guess it's a working formula because that's basically how their content has been for the longest time. And like any deviation to where like you get into a lot more principled issues such as Israel Gaza, it's going to be it's going to be a bit more divisive, and like they don't seem like they want to be as divisive figures unless they're actually engaging directly with conservatives, which they don't really tend to do that much.
Which is like so counterintuitive when you look at the polling numbers, which has Democratic Party leadership at record lows.
Exactly.
So the
Like they
message
should be calling
from
for primaries, and
independent,
they're not.
yeah, the message from all lefty media or all objective media should be the Democratic Party needs to figure out a way to be the anti-MAGA movement because the pendulum's swinging back the other way. It's just a
Hmm.
matter of whether or not we're going to see some real change when we get President Newsom, because that's who we're going to get. Make no mistake about it.
God.
I'm not calling it yet, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be the nominee. And as we've talked about, whoever wins that nomination for the Democratic Party in 2028 is going to be the next president, because there's no way that Republican wins, even if it's JD Vance. By the
Hell
way,
no.
did Trump come out with and make an appearance? Did he do a
He
public
just
appearance
he
today?
just did
He
today, I
did.
believe. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I have not
Um,
ABS. I have not heard of this silent succession. I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
it's
he
Go
did a
ahead.
press conference, and someone from the press corps asked him if he was aware of it, and he's like, I wasn't aware of it. And he's like, man, that's serious. And but yeah, he was playing golf with John Gruden, I think, on Saturday. Um,
No, apparently that was like from an old picture, and
Yeah, that was an old picture. That
oh,
was the
really?
23rd.
See,
Yeah,
yeah.
they got
No, so he's been out of the public eye for like I think 6 days.
6 days. Yeah.
Like they did like some like far away camera shots of him walking, and the most pressing theory about it right now is he suffered a stroke, and I'm actually like firmly in the belief that he had some sort of stroke. There's a lot of compelling evidence that points to that fact, and because
I
he
think he
had
did
this
a press
health
conference
episode,
today. He did a press conference today, and he
yes,
talked. Yeah, he seemed okay.
not for he didn't talk for long, but they probably gave him a couple uppers. He sniffed a couple times, and he went out there, said a few things, and everybody surrounding him hit all his yes men, just making sure that can he get through this and whatnot. You can kind of tell, but yeah, I most theories point to him having a stroke, and like the whole administration went quiet for a couple days, just trying to like remedy the situation, try to like see if he gets a little better. And I guess they're taking it slowly, step by step now. But yeah, it was very spooky for a little bit. He did go play golf. Some old pics were posted with some nuance based on press conference. No stroke. I think he had a stroke. I think he did a mini stroke, because there is such a thing. But
Yes, there is.
I don't think Vance has the sauce. If he was the successor to Trump, not I mean, aside from the
No,
fact that it'd be
no,
absolutely
it doesn't
hilarious
matter.
if
They're going to
Trump.
lose. As long
No,
as
of
the
course,
elections
yeah,
have integrity.
no,
That's the
no,
thing you got to
yeah,
worry
yeah.
about.
And I was thinking about this earlier, and like I didn't think Trump was dead. I think he did suffer some sort of health crisis, and at his age, either heart failure or stroke would have been the more likely case. But it would have been like poetically hilarious if he ended up actually biting the dust before Joe Biden did.
Yeah,
It
that would be funny.
it's hilarious.
Maybe it'll
But
happen.
we'll see. Yeah, we'll see how it plays out, I suppose.
And do you think he'll, if his health presides, do you think he's actually going to relinquish power, or do you think he's going to make a ploy to stay in power?
No, I think
Trump
he's
will
gonna.
die in office.
He'll die in office. Yeah,
Yeah,
more
or
than
he'll,
likely.
or he'll set up the next, or he'll lose in 2028 and then go die in private life or something like that. I don't think he's going to run a third time.
And do you
He's
think
just
Don
slowly
Jr.
degrading.
Don
No,
Jr.
No,
No,
I
not
don't
Don
think
Jr.
so.
No, he's not the successor. No.
No.
No one's. No, I mean, the thing is, MAGA won't go away, but it's not going to
Mhm.
have another. It's not going to have another leader like Trump for a really long time. But it's not going to go away. That's what people have to
I
realize.
think-
Is MAGA has always been a part of our country since its founding, really.
I think for the remainder of his term, like his health is just going to degrade further and further, and they're going to seriously have to weaken at Bernie's his ass in a half conscious state for like the remainder of his term, and it's going to be it's going to be hilarious and scary.
And then why don't you think Vance will be able to carry the torch?
He's intellectually insecure. He's not. He doesn't.
He's not charismatic at all.
He's not charismatic.
He's a
He's
fucking
nothing.
stuffed shirt.
He's very much not like Trump at all, and he just doesn't have what it takes. He would fold against pretty much like any Democratic candidate on the opposing side.
So Newsom's the front runner here.
I think so. Unfortunately,
it seems like that. I hope it's not him. I prefer JB Pritzker.
JB Pritzker would be awesome.
Yeah. But there's really not many names. But Newsom's a fucking weasel. Doesn't believe in anything, and I'm tired of listening to him.
Yeah.
AOC's number 2 on the betting right now. Newsom is
but
the
AOC
favorite.
fucked up with Iron Dome.
But no,
the far left is done with AOC.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I think she could do it, but she should go for Senate first.
She should do Senate and be a creature of Capitol Hill. She's not management material. She's just not.
Yeah.
I like her, but she's not a president of the United States. She's not.
Yeah, she's a good attack dog, but like the president, no, not even close, not yet.
What about Zach Shapiro?
No, fuck that.
Josh Shapiro?
I'm just these are the names that have been popping
up.
I know. I'm very curious what's going to happen here.
No, I mean no. Shapiro doesn't have nearly as much appeal as Newsom does.
No. I mean, the people who really, really want it right now are definitely Pete Buttigieg and Cory Booker.
Yep. Cory Booker is such a disgrace. What a jerk
they're both so awful.
And none of them are supporting Mamdani. What do you feel about Mamdani, Sean?
It's one of those things. I don't know if about it. I think, Cuomo. He had no business.
Pretty pathetic that the Democratic Party establishment couldn't put up someone better than Cuomo.
Yeah, I mean that's that. And I mean, we'll see. I think I don't know enough about it. I think he's going to be the poster child. I worry that if and when he becomes the mayor of New York, and if he does implement some sort of programs that could be interpreted as socialism, I think it could definitely negatively impact the Democrats in 2028.
Unless, of course, they work.
Potentially, I'm saying.
Hey, if anybody can get it right, New York can, because they got all the money they need. They got all the fucking money they need. They've been solving problems for hundreds of years in that fucking town.
I think it would only negatively impact the Democrats if they don't at least acknowledge his popularity and the potential of the success of the policies that he would implement. Because like New York City alone is like a whole different beast. Like more people live in that city alone than like maybe half of the like various United States alone have like their entire populations. But I'm optimistic about them at the very least.
All right. Well, maybe when we have you back on, Sean, we'll circle back about Mamdani and socialism, because it shouldn't be as scary as it is still in mainstream America.
And I promise I'll have a more professional setup too.
When's the election with Mamdani? When do we find out the conclusion there?
Is it November?
It's September, isn't it? No, it's it's November. New
Interesting.
York General Mayor.
November 4th, is it?
That would make sense.
I forget.
November 4th. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's November 4th. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Can't
I
wait.
appreciate you having me. I really do. I a big fan of watching all your videos, your essays, and
Cool.
StatPad to meet you and be on the same stream and with you and Deter.
Of course.
I kind of like the vibe you have right now, though. If you came back and it was more stable, I don't know. You have this errant of mystery and mystique about you right now that I think
it's
you might
working.
want to think about.
It's working. It's
Yeah,
working, dude. The old
Well,
the Godfather lighting.
But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I
Yeah.
well,
appreciate
cool.
Yeah, thanks for coming
Yeah.
on, Sean. We really appreciate it. And in case you are watching and have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, like, share if you can. But really, the subscribe
Thank
is
you,
what's
guys.
important. And until next time, we are all here reminding you that you don't get change in America by asking nicely. And come see me on this space tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. I will be there with Devil's Advocate Productions as usual. And until next time, y'all, stay
Everybody have a good night.
sharp. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. See ya.